Hello, my name is Elizabeth Barnott and my project title is Assessing the Big Wigs, the Significance of Hairstyle in the 18th Century. So before we get into the actual video, which is mostly slides, I thought I would just kind of get into what my question is about and a rough outline of the kind of things that I'm going to be talking about. So it's pretty self-explanatory, the history of hairstyle, but it's much more diverse than you might imagine. But before I first started researching, I had a fear that I wouldn't be able to find enough information to answer the question or to get a 4,000 word essay. But I was very, very wrong, and there is such a diverse amount of information out there. I mean, I've been getting some really good primary sources from Echo and Bernie, really, really good advertisements on Bernie for hair products of the times. It's all really interesting. And hairstyle is affected and changed by things like the economics of the time and the politics of the time, which makes it so multifaceted, and I didn't realize that until I started researching it. And I think that's why understanding the significance is relevant to history. It's a kind of history that's, I think, underrated. You can really learn a lot about the time period by looking how a person dressed and how they wore their hair. And you'll understand more about that when we get into the rest of the video, but I just think it's really interesting. I have run into a few problems, almost too much information, and I'm thinking maybe I should have split it down to just one gender, not looking at both. And it is a broad time period, but it is really fascinating looking at a whole century of changing hairstyles. So anyway, let's get into the rest of the video, and I hope you enjoy my progress. Okay, so to start with, I'll just go through some of the key questions that I've been looking at when I go through my sources and the kind of thing that I'm trying to write about. So firstly, the political significance of hairstyle. Is there such a thing? I think definitely yes. I've been finding this question really interesting, and I'm going to go through it in a little bit more detail in the next slide. I'm just going to use this one question. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one question just to kind of show my findings and my hypotheses that I've kind of been coming up with. Anyway, so we'll talk about that one in the next slide. But some of my other questions. What impact did hairstyle have on individualism during the 18th century? Now, in particular, I want to talk about the macaronis as a case study for this one, as they really took on hairstyle as authenticity, hairstyle as the self. It really kind of brings a whole new dimension to hair and to hairdressing and style that was really coming forth in the 18th century. And I think that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people during this time took on hairstyle as a way to express their individuality. Next question. What kind of link is there between hairstyle and consumerism? What effect did wigs have on the economy? This one is really interesting, especially in England where there were master wig makers, and we can even take it further to the hat making. There was a big link in the consumption of this new kind of fashion that was only just arising. And how influential was French hairstyles in Britain? Well, that's also a really interesting one. It was very influential, very significant often, with relations between Britain and France, and how maybe those relations changed how the British people took to French styles. It's all very interesting. So there's just some of my key questions, and in the next slide I'll go through the first question. Okay, so the political significance of hairstyle. Is there such a thing? Well, I'm going to argue yes, definitely there is, and in particular in association with the French Revolution. So just a bit of background, the French influence on not only hairstyle but also fashion in England was immense. Pretty much whatever you saw in the French court, it would trickle down to England. So here we've got, on the slide I have two pictures. The top, the one with the larger hair, is pre-French Revolution, and the one on the bottom is after the French Revolution. So the top one, this is called the Pompadour style, made famous by Madame de Pompadour, a mistress of King Louis at the time. She was very prominent in the French court and was of big significance for many years. So you can see her hair is big. It's definitely not all real. It's probably mostly a wig. It would have been white, powdered with wig powder, There would probably be a cushion or wiring underneath to keep it up, and there would be some kind of extravagant thing at the top. I think it's a bow or beads or feathers, but they got pretty extravagant. And so then down the bottom you've got this other one. This is called the hedgehog. Now this is all natural hair. It's quite disheveled even, this disheveled look that was coming about. And so they're so different. So what was it that created this different style? Now, the French Revolution was in between these two, so what exactly was it? And from doing some research, I found out something really interesting. Now, it's all related to wig powder. So, as you probably know, during the French Revolution, the people were starving. The poorest of the poor couldn't afford bread, couldn't afford the wheat flour for the bread. But the rich people, and the people in the upper class, were still using wheat flour to powder their hair. And so it looked really, really bad if you were wearing a wig or powdering your hair, because these people can't afford wheat flour and you're putting it on your head. So Rousseau, he wrote that the poor are without bread because we must have powder for our hair. So I think that is just extremely interesting. So therefore, during the French Revolution, it became no longer fashionable to wear a wig, and you could guess someone's political views just by how they did their hair. But by 1800, the trend was definitely shorter hair, and this disheveled look was extremely popular throughout France, and this trickled down to England, and that's why we see it there, for the same reasons that the pompadour trickled down to England. It's just popular fashion. But this disheveled look had passed by 1810, as all fashions do, but I just think it's so interesting that a big political change could alter hairstyle so much. Following on from that previous slide, I'd like to talk a little bit more about my preliminary findings. It seems that the significance of hairstyle in the 18th century was enormous, and maybe even more so than it is today in contemporary society. The impact that hairstyle had on the economy is evident in the relationship between wheat flour and wig powder. Because wig powder was made of wheat flour, when wheat flour was scarce, a tax rose on wig powder and the consumption of wigs fell. Furthermore, wigs and individualism saw a new area for self-expression. Individuals were able to use hairstyle and wigs to express themselves in ways that they hadn't been able to do before, and this really came about in the 18th century. Lastly, historical figures really influenced the changing nature of hairstyles. French ladies such as Madame de Pompadour and Marie Antoinette really influenced the hairstyle changes of the times in England. So now I'm going to talk about my sources and methods that I've been using when going through the scholarship that I've come across. I've been lucky enough to find some really great primary sources, using Echo mainly. Most of them are essays, about 50, sometimes to about 100 pages long, concerning things like the nature of the preservation of the hair, which is one by J. Mather, a perfumer in 1795. I have one by Peter Gilchrist from 1770, an essay on the hair. 1780, William Moore wrote The Art of Hairdressing. And I even have one from 1773 called The Macaroni Jester, but I'm pretty sure this is more of a satirical piece. This one was written by John Cook. But these are just four that I found really interesting and that actually really benefit my research. So I've been reading through these, finding pieces of information that really hit home, and these are the ones that I've kind of sorted through the other ones that I've found. Botany as well, I found some really great advertisements for wig powder, head scratches, lice removal, all sorts of other goodies for hair-related subject. Secondary sources, of course, some really great journals and books. I mean, I have at least 10 really great hair-related, wig-related journals. Some really, really good books that were published quite a while ago, sometimes 50 years ago, but still really on topic, lots of pictures, really into the 18th century. Well, that's pretty much everything I have to say. I'm not sure how I feel about the fact that wig powder has become the most exciting part of my day, but there you go. Thanks very much for your time.